First, the Islamic State organization says that it was behind Tuesday's deadly attacks in the Belgian capital. At least 36 people are now known to have been killed and many more, perhaps as many as 200, injured in those attacks which struck the main Brussels airport this morning, then, 40 minutes later, the central Malbec metro station. Well, for several weeks now, European security officials have been bracing for a major attack, and those fears were heightened last week with the arrest of Salah Abdeslam, who is a key suspect of the November 13th Paris attacks. France 24's Olivier Salazar-Winspear has this report.
Fear and panic as people abandon their luggage and try to escape through the smoke at the check-in area of Zaventem's international airport. 2 explosions tore through the departures hall just after 8 o'clock on Tuesday morning, when this European hub was particularly busy, leaving several dead and many more injured. Authorities have confirmed it was a suicide attack.
I heard a man shouting just behind the counter of the Belfius Bank. He was speaking in Arabic. And when he finished speaking, I saw this enormous explosion. Enormous. Everyone panicked. People were running all over the place. I hid under the counter where I was working.
You just feel like a wave. Explosion, a wave go through you.
Some passengers were led onto the tarmac for fear that other bombs remained inside the terminal, and then the airport was evacuated. Just 1 hour later, while emergency services were concentrated at Zaventem, scenes of chaos in Brussels' metro network. The train was rocked by an explosion. Between the stations Arlois and Malbec, this footage shows people scrambling to escape their carriage, evacuating via the train tracks, as panicked children cry in the background. Above ground, plumes of smoke filled the streets at the heart of the Belgian capital's diplomatic district, just a stone's throw from the EU Commission and Parliament buildings. This was the first photograph released of the carriage where the blast occurred. Amid the mayhem and carnage, survivors gave their account of the ordeal.
The explosion happened in the first carriage. When the train departed, the blast occurred. I dropped to the floor like everyone else, and we quickly tried to open the doors because smoke was filling the carriage, and we couldn't breathe.
We saw an explosion and a huge flash of light, and the train just blew up. The windows crashed in on us, and the doors blew open, and then everyone just fell to the floor. And then there was a second explosion.
Others travelling to work or into the Belgian capital this Tuesday were not so lucky. Just after the blast, passengers were being treated on the pavement outside neighbouring shops, some of them seriously injured. Others were killed in the blast. It took just minutes for security services to lock down the area, with over 200 additional soldiers deployed on the streets. The city's bus, tram and metro networks were suspended, and flights in and out of the international airport were cancelled. Belgium's terror alert has been raised to level 4, the highest level. 3 days of national mourning have now been declared. At the EU's headquarters in Brussels, flags are flying at half-mast.
Well, for the friends and relatives of those people who were injured, the wait for news about their loved ones has been unbearable. This is they're being treated at hospitals right across the Belgian capital. According to reports, some of the victims lost limbs, whilst others suffered severe burns. Shattered glass and the possible presence of nails packed in with the explosives has been the cause of numerous cuts and lacerations. France 24's Thomas Waterhouse has more.
Pushing through the Brussels traffic, sirens wailing and escorted by a police motorbike, yet another ambulance races to the Saint-Luc hospital after a morning of bloodshed on the capital's streets. Shortly after the twin bomb attack at the international airport and the explosion on the metro, the city's hospitals were all placed on high alert.
We have been informed by the authorities early this morning that we need to start up what we call our MASH plan, which is a kind of contingency plan to prepare all the medical staff and nursing to be ready for the victims arriving.
Scores of surgeons, doctors, nurses and psychologists prepared themselves to deal with over 200 people wounded in Tuesday's multiple blasts.
The people we are treating here are mainly burns victims, and there are patients who are in shock from the explosion. And we have patients who are psychologically traumatized.
Inside the hospital, despite the increased number of admissions, the hospital's usual consultations continued, but under heightened security, with both patients and visitors all meticulously searched. Some people simply came here to donate their blood in an attempt to help.
It's hard to do something specific, but I want to do something. If I can help, I will.
Meanwhile, at the end of what Prime Minister Charles Michel has called a dark day for the country, the first hearses arrived at the airport to remove the bodies of those killed in the attack.
Well, for more analysis, we can speak now to Michel Nesterenko, who is the Director of Research in charge of open sources, cyber terrorism and airline security at the French Research on Intelligence. Thank you so much for speaking to us. There seemed to be a certain amount of inevitability about these attacks, didn't there?
Yeah, absolutely, because it's next to impossible to secure the check-in areas, whether it's at the airport or at the metro. At the metro, that would mean a waiting time of about 1 hour every time you're going to board the metro, which is something impossible. And if you start securing the check-in area, you're going to push the queues out into the sidewalk, and the terrorist is going to strike the queue on the sidewalk. So it's next to impossible. Perfect security means no travel, which means indeed. Everybody starves.
So that basically there was nothing the authorities there in Belgium could have done differently to prevent those attacks.
Yes, they could have arrested the 100 to 1,000 terrorists who came back from Syria. They're well known, the names are known, but nobody has arrested them yet. There's about 10,000 of them running around Europe.
You're an expert specifically in airline security. I just want to talk to you a little bit about procedures at airports, because there have been calls for people to be screened before they even enter an airport, which would have prevented today's style of attack at the airport in Brussels, because, of course, they were allowed into the airport. They hadn't passed security. Do you see major changes being necessary at airports?
We've talked about this for the last 15 years. And if you stop people from entering the check-in area, the queue will be on the sidewalk, which means the bomb is going to blow up on the sidewalk. You're going to have just as many people killed and hurt.
So you don't see any likelihood of procedures at airports in Europe perhaps becoming more like those in India or the Middle East, where only people with valid documents are even allowed to enter the building?
Yeah, but when do you start checking people? Do you start checking them on the sidewalk, out in the city? Where? And at that location, you're going to have a queue, and the queue is going to be hit.
Do you see these attacks as perhaps being a trigger that's going to frighten off people from airline travel?
None at all, because statistically, there are very, very few attacks compared to the thousands and thousands of flights every day. And Israel has been living with attacks for the last 30 years, and life hasn't stopped in Israel.
And in terms of tracking people before they attack, one of the other areas you're a specialist in is cybersecurity. Do you think that the authorities are doing enough to survey these individuals who pose a threat, or do you think the individuals themselves are only too aware that they're under surveillance and they're being more careful to cover their tracks?
Both is true, but we have a judicial system which says that people cannot be arrested and put in jail before they've committed a crime. And today we don't have laws that says that just traveling to Syria is a crime punishable by 30 years in prison. And this is where the problem is. We know who went to Syria to get trained, to cut throats and so on. They're not fighting an army in Syria. No, they're massacring, the population. And they're coming back here and they say, we want to do the same thing here, and we let them in. This is where the gap in security is.
Well, that means that the freedom of movement within the Schengen zone is perhaps something that you believe needs to be revisited as an idea.
Not the freedom of movement, the arrest of all the young people, the 10,000 or 20,000 young people, young Europeans who went to Syria to learn how to kill effectively. Those people need to be put in prison for 30 years. We know who they are in majority. We know there are about 200 or more in Brussels, running around Brussels.
Yeah,
So
specifically in the area
of
of Molenbeek, which for the last 4 months, ever since the Paris attacks, we've been talking about Molenbeek over and over again. And we get this impression from reports in the media and from what journalists are reporting from the scene that this is a hotbed for extremists. Is that an exaggeration, do you think?
No, I don't think so. You know, we had this same problem between England and France about 15, 20 years ago, where the terrorists would put bombs in the Paris metro, and they would go and hide in England. And we've had now the same example of, with Belgium. So, we have to stop. We have to all fight together, and we have to put those people in jail before they strike. We know they're going to strike, and the day they strike, it's going to be horrible. It's going to be big. So we have to make it a crime so that they can be imprisoned.
It looks like there's one man still at large from those attacks there, at least one man from those attacks there in Brussels. The authorities showing CCTV pictures of 3 men suspected of carrying out those attacks, one of whom remains unaccounted for, meaning he could still be at large. How would the authorities go about tracking him down? Because presumably there are people known to the authorities that would likely shelter an individual like him.
Exactly, that's the whole point. We know that Abdeslam had about 20 buddies, and all those people, the 20 buddies, 20 friends, high school friends and so on, they should all be arrested. All of them right now. We can't wait for the next bomb. This is the problem. It's we're not responding with the proper strengths that we should have against this catastrophic menace,
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Michel Nesterenko, thank you for joining us from Geneva. Moving on now, world leaders have been quick to express their shock at these attacks, with the UN chief Ban Ki-moon calling them despicable and demanding that those responsible face justice. Meanwhile, the Belgian Prime Minister Charles Michel has vowed that his country's values will not be undermined and that Belgium will remain united.
Je veux vraiment avec la plus grande force.
I am determined to say to those who chose to become barbaric enemies of liberties, democracy, and fundamental values that we will stay united and fully mobilized, with great pain in our stomachs and our hearts,
avec aujourd'hui une douleur profonde dans le ventre et dans le cœur,
but also with full determination to act to protect our liberties and our way of life.
Nos libertés pour protéger nos manières de vivre.
The Belgian Prime Minister Charles Michel speaking there. Meanwhile, the King and Queen of Belgium said that they were, and I quote, devastated by today's violence, describing the attacks as odious and cowardly. Let's listen in.
Mesdames et messieurs,
ladies and gentlemen, today our country is in mourning.
pour chacun de nous,
For every one of us, March 22nd will never be a day like any other. These shattered lives and deep wounds belong to the whole country.
de tout notre pays. Face
We will keep facing this menace together,
à répondre ensemble, avec fermeté,
firmly
avec calme,
and with calm and dignity. We must keep trusting in each other. This trust is our strength.
force.
The King of Belgium speaking there. Well, last year it was Paris. Today it was Brussels. Those were the words of the French President François Hollande as he spoke of those attacks in the Belgian capital, which came just 4 months after a wave of attacks here in Paris, which claimed the lives of 130 people. France 24's Olivia Salazar-Winspear has this report on the international reaction.
For your kind words. Thank you for...
Unable to fight back tears, Federica Mogherini called for peace and dialogue as she extended her condolences to those in Brussels. Speaking earlier from Amman, she said both Europe and the Middle East are united in suffering and must join forces to prevent radicalization.